Welcome to Thueringer for Farming Simulator 15. We now continue in our reading of The Octopus, A Story of California by Frank Norris, Chapter 1. As Presley came up to the edge of the porch, pushing his bicycle in front of him, Annixter excused himself for not getting up, alleging that the cramps returned the moment he was off his back. "What are you doing up this way?" he demanded. "Oh, just having a look around," answered Presley. "How's the ranch?" "Say," observed the other, ignoring his question, "what's this I hear about Derek giving his tenants the bounce and working Los Muertos himself, working all his land?" Presley made a sharp movement of impatience with his free hand. "I've heard nothing else myself since morning. I suppose it must be so." "Huh," grunted Annixter, spitting out a pruned stone. "You give Magnus to Eric my compliments and tell him he's a fool." "What do you mean?" "I suppose Derek thinks he's still running his mine, and that the same principles will apply to getting grain out of the earth as to getting gold. Oh, let him go on and see where he brings up." "That's right, there's your western farmer," he exclaimed contemptuously. "Get the guts out of your land, work it to death, never give it a rest, never alternate your crop, and then when your soil is exhausted, sit down and roar about hard times." "I suppose Magnus thinks the land has had rest enough these last 2 dry seasons," observed Presley. "He has raised no crop to speak of for 2 years. The land has had a good rest." "Ah, yes, that sounds well," Annixter contradicted, unwilling to be convinced. "In a way, the land's been rested, and then, again, in a way it hasn't." But Presley, scenting an argument, refrained from answering and bethought himself of moving on. "I'm going to leave my wheel here for a while, Buck," he said, "if you don't mind. I'm going up to the spring, and the road is rough between here and there." "Stop in for dinner on your way back," said Annixter. "There'll be venison steak. One of the boys got a deer over in the foothills last week. Out of season, but never mind that. I can't eat it. This stomach of mine wouldn't digest sweet oil today. Get here about 6. "Well, maybe I will, thank you," said Presley, moving off. "By the way," he added, "I see your barn is about done." "You bet," answered Annixter. "In about a fortnight now she'll be all ready." "It's a big barn," murmured Presley, glancing around the angle of the house toward where the great structure stood. "Guess we'll have to have a dance there before we move the stock in," observed Annixter. "That's a custom all around here." Presley took himself off, but at the gate Annixter called after him, his mouth full of prunes. "Say, take a look at that herd of sheep as you go up. They are right off here to the east of the road, about half a mile from here. I guess that's the biggest lot of sheep you ever saw. You might write a poem about 'em. Lamb, ram, sheep, graze, sunny days. Catch on?" Beyond Broderson Creek, as Presley advanced, tramping along on foot now, the land opened out again into the same vast spaces of dull brown earth, sprinkled with stubble, such as had been characteristic of Derek's ranch. To the east, the reach seemed infinite, flat, cheerless, heat-ridden, unrolling like a gigantic scroll toward the faint shimmer of the distant horizons, with here and there an isolated live oak to break the somber monotony. But bordering the road to the westward, the surface roughened and raised, clambering up to the higher ground, on the crest of which the old mission and its surrounding pear trees were now plainly visible. Just beyond the mission, the road bent abruptly eastward, striking off across the seed ranch, But Presley left the road at this point, going on across the open fields. There was no longer any trail. It was toward 3 o'clock. The sun still spun a silent blazing disk high in the heavens, and tramping through the clods of uneven, broken plow was fatiguing work. The slope of the lowest foothills begun, the surface of the country became rolling, and suddenly as he topped a higher ridge, Presley came upon the sheep. Already he had passed the larger part of the herd, an intervening rise of ground having hidden it from sight. Now as he turned halfway about, looking down into the shallow hollow between him and the curve of the creek, he saw them very plainly. The fringe of the herd was some 200 yards distant, but its further side, in that elusive shimmer of hot surface air, seemed miles away. The sheep were spread out roughly in the shape of a figure eight, two larger herds connected by a smaller, and were headed to the southward, moving slowly, grazing on the wheat stubble as they proceeded. But the number seemed incalculable. Hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of gray, rounded backs, all exactly alike, huddled, close-packed, alive, hid the earth from sight. It was no longer an aggregate of individuals. It was a mass, a compact, solid, slowly moving mass, huge, without form, like a thick-pressed growth of mushrooms spreading out in all directions over the earth. From it there arose a vague murmur, confused, inarticulate, like the sound of very distant surf, while all the air in the vicinity was heavy with the warm, ammoniacal odor of the thousands of crowding bodies. All the colors of the scene were somber, the brown of the earth, the faded yellow of the dead stubble, the gray of the myriad of undulating backs. Only on the far side of the herd, erect, motionless, a single note of black, a speck, a dot. The shepherd stood, leaning upon an empty water trough, solitary, grave, impressive. For a few moments Presley stood, watching. Then, as he started to move on, a curious thing occurred. At first, he thought he had heard someone call his name. He paused, listening. There was no sound but the vague noise of the moving sheep. Then, as this first impression passed, it seemed to him that he had been beckoned to. Yet nothing stirred, except for the lonely figure beyond the herd. There was no one in sight. He started on again, and in half a dozen steps found himself looking over his shoulder. Without knowing why, he looked toward the shepherd, then halted and looked a second time and a third. Had the shepherd called to him? Presley knew that he had heard no voice. Brusquely, all his attention seemed riveted upon this distant figure. He put one forearm over his eyes to keep off the sun, gazing across the intervening herd. Surely the shepherd had called him. But at the next instant he started, uttering an exclamation under his breath. The faraway speck of black became animated. Presley remarked a sweeping gesture. Though the man had not beckoned to him before, there was no doubt that he was beckoning now. Without any hesitation, and singularly interested in the incident, Presley turned sharply aside and hurried on toward the shepherd, skirting the herd, wondering all the time that he should answer the call with so little question, so little hesitation. But the shepherd came forward to meet Presley, followed by one of his dogs. As the two men approached each other, Presley, closely studying the other, began to wonder where he had seen him before. It must have been a very long time ago, upon one of his previous visits to the ranch. Certainly, however, there was something familiar in the shepherd's face and figure. When they came closer to each other, and Presley could see him more distinctly, this sense of a previous acquaintance was increased and sharpened. The shepherd was a man of about 35. He was very lean and spare. His brown canvas overalls were thrust into laced boots. A cartridge belt without any cartridges encircled his waist. A gray flannel shirt, open at the throat, showed his breast, tanned and ruddy. He wore no hat. His hair was very black and rather long. A pointed beard covered his chin, growing straight and fine from the hollow cheeks. The absence of any covering for his head was, no doubt, habitual for him, for his face was as brown as an Indian's, a ruddy brown, quite different from Presley's dark olive. To Presley's morbidly keen observation, the general impression of the shepherd's face was intensely interesting. It was uncommon to an astonishing degree. Presley's vivid imagination chose to see it in the face of an ascetic, of a recluse, almost that of a young seer. So must have appeared the half-inspired shepherds of the Hebraic legends, the younger prophets of Israel, dwellers in the wilderness, beholders of visions, having their existence in a continual dream, talkers with God, gifted with strange powers. Suddenly, at some 20 paces distant from the approaching shepherd, Presley stopped short, his eyes riveted upon the other. "Vanamee!" he exclaimed. The shepherd smiled and came forward, holding out his hand, saying, "I thought it was you. When I saw you come over the hill, I called you." "But not with your voice," returned Presley. "I knew that someone wanted me. I felt it. I should have remembered that you could do that kind of thing. I have never known it to fail. It helps with the sheep." "With the sheep?" "In a way. I can't tell exactly how. We don't understand these things yet. There are times when, if I close my eyes and dig my fists into my temples, I can hold the entire herd for perhaps a minute. Perhaps so it's imagination. Who knows? But it's good to see you again. How long has it been since the last time? 2, 3, nearly 5 years." It was more than that. It was 6 years since Presley and Vanamee had met, and then it had been for a short time only, during one of the shepherd's periodical brief returns to that part of the country. During a week, he and Presley had been much together, for the two were devoted friends. Then, as abruptly, as mysteriously as he had come, Vanamee disappeared. Presley awoke one morning to find him gone. Thus it had been with Vanamee for a period of 16 years. He lived his life in the unknown, one could not tell where, in the desert, in the mountains, throughout all the vast and vague Southwest, solitary, strange. 3, 4, 5 years passed. The shepherd would be almost forgotten. Never the most trivial scrap of information as to his whereabouts reached Los Muertos. He had melted off into the surface shimmer of the desert, into the mirage. He sank below the horizons. He was swallowed up in the waste of sand and sage. Then, without warning, he would reappear, coming in from the wilderness, emerging from the unknown. No one knew him well. In all that countryside he had but 3 friends, Presley, Magnus Derrick, and the priest at the mission of San Juan de Guadalajara, Father Sarria. He remained always a mystery, living a life half real, half legendary. In all those years he did not seem to have grown older by a single day. At this time, Presley knew him to be 36 years of age. But since the first day the two had met, the shepherd's face and bearing had, to his eyes, remained the same. At this moment, Presley was looking into the same face he had seen many, many years ago. It was a face stamped with an unspeakable sadness, a deathless grief, the permanent imprint of a tragedy long past, but yet a living issue. Presley told himself that it was impossible to look long into Vanamee's eyes without knowing that here was a man whose whole being had been at one time shattered and riven to its lowest depths, whose life had suddenly stopped at a certain moment of its development. The two friends sat down upon the ledge of the watering trough, their eyes wandering incessantly toward the slow-moving herd, grazing on the wheat stubble, moving southward as they grazed. "Where have you come from this time?" Presley had asked. "Where have you kept yourself?" The other swept the horizon to the south and east with a vague gesture. "Off there, down to the south, very far off. So many places I can't remember. I went the long trail this time, a long, long ways. Arizona, the Mexicos, and then afterwards Utah, Nevada, following the horizon, traveling at hazard. Into Arizona first, going in by Monument Pass, and then on to the south, through the country of the Navajos, down by the Agathian Needle, a great blade of red rock jutting from out the desert like a knife thrust, then on and on through the Mexicos, all through the southwest, then back again in a great circle by Chihuahua and Aldama to Laredo to Torreon and Albuquerque. From there across the Ampagre Plateau into the Uinta country, then the last two west through Nevada to California and to the valley of the San Joaquin. His voice lapsed to a monotone, his eyes becoming fixed. He continued to speak as though half awake, his thoughts elsewhere, seeing again in the eye of his mind the reach of desert and red hill, the purple mountain, the level stretch of alkali, leper white, all the savage, gorgeous desolation of the long trail. He ignored Presley for the moment, but on the other hand, Presley himself gave him but half his attention. The return of Anime had stimulated the poet's memory. He recalled the incidents of Anime's life, reviewing again that terrible drama which had uprooted his soul, which had driven him forth a wanderer, a shunner of men, a sojourner in waste places. He was, strangely enough, a college graduate and a man of wide reading and great intelligence, but he had chosen to lead his own life, which was that of a recluse. Of a temperament similar in many ways to Presley's, there were capabilities in Anime that were not ordinarily to be found in the rank and file of men. Living close to nature, a poet by instinct, where Presley was but a poet by training, there developed in him a great sensitiveness to beauty and an almost abnormal capacity for great happiness and great sorrow. He felt things intensely, deeply. He never forgot. It was when he was 18 or 19, at the formative and most impressionable period of his life, that he had met Angele Varian. Presley barely remembered her as a girl of 16, beautiful, almost beyond expression, who lived with an aged aunt on the seed ranch back of the mission. At this moment he was trying to recall how she looked, with her hair of gold hanging in two straight plaits on either side of her face, making three-cornered her round white forehead, her wonderful eyes, violet blue, heavy-lidded, with their astonishing upward slant toward the temples. The slant that gave a strange oriental cast to her face, perplexing, enchanting. He remembered the Egyptian fullness of the lips, the strange balancing movement of her head upon her slender neck, the same movement that one sees in a snake at poise. Never had he seen a girl more radiantly beautiful, never a beauty so strange, so troublous, so out of all accepted standards. It was small wonder that Vanamee had loved her, and less wonder still that his love had been so intense, so passionate, so part of himself. Angele had loved him with a love no less than his own. It was one of those legendary passions that sometimes occur, idyllic, untouched by civilization, spontaneous as the growth of trees, natural as dewfall, strong as the firm-seated mountains. At the time of his meeting with Angele, Anime was living on the Los Muertos ranch. It was there he had chosen to spend one of his college vacations, but he preferred to pass it in out-of-door work, sometimes herding cattle, sometimes pitching hay, sometimes working with pick and dynamite stick on the ditches in the 4th Division of the ranch, riding the range, mending breaks in the wire fences, making himself generally useful. College-bred though he was, the life pleased him. He was, as he desired, close to nature, living the full measure of life, a worker among workers, taking enjoyment in the simple pleasures, healthy in mind and body. He believed in an existence passed in this fashion in the country, working hard, eating full, drinking deep, sleeping dreamlessly. But every night after supper, he saddled his pony and rode over to the garden of the old mission. The adobe dividing wall on that side, which once had separated the mission garden and the seed ranch, had long since crumbled away, and the boundary between the two pieces of ground was marked only by a line of venerable pear trees. Here, under those trees, he found Angel waiting him. And there the two had sat through the hot, still evening, their arms about each other, watching the moon rise over the foothills, listening to the trickle of water in the moss-encrusted fountain in the garden, and the steady croak of the great frogs that lived in the damp north corner of the enclosure. Through all one summer, the enchantment of that new-found wonderful love, pure and untainted, filled the lives of each of them with its sweetness. The summer passed, and the harvest moon came and went. The nights were very dark. In the deep shade of the pear trees, they could no longer see each other. When they met at the rendezvous, Vanity found her only with his groping hands. They did not speak. Mere words were useless between them. Silently, as his reaching hands touched her warm body, he took her in his arms, searching for her lips with his. Then one night, the tragedy had suddenly leaped out from the shadow with the abruptness of an explosion. It was impossible afterwards to reconstruct the manner of its occurrence. To Angel's mind, what there was left of it, the matter always remained a hideous blur, a blot, a vague, terrible confusion. No doubt they two had been watched. The plan succeeded too well for any other supposition. One moonless night, Angel, arriving under the black shadow of the pear trees a little earlier than usual, found the apparently familiar figure waiting for her. All unsuspecting, she gave herself to the embrace of a strange pair of arms, and Vanity, arriving but a score of moments later, stumbled over her prostrate body, inert and unconscious, in the shadow of the overspiring trees. Who was the other? Angel was carried to her home on the Seed Ranch, delirious, all but raving, and Vanity, with knife and revolver ready, ranged the countryside like a wolf. He was not alone. The whole country arose, raging, horror-struck. Posse after posse was formed, sent out, and returned without so much as a clue. Upon no one could even the shadow of suspicion be thrown. The other had withdrawn into an impenetrable mystery. There he remained. He never was found. He never was so much as heard of. A legend arose about him, this prowler of the night, this strange, fearful figure with an unseen face, swooping in there from out of the darkness, come and gone in an instant, but leaving behind him a track of terror and death and rage and undying grief. Within the year in giving birth to the child, Angel had died. The little babe was taken by Angel's parents, and Angel was buried in the mission garden near to the aged gray sundial. Vanity stood by during the ceremony, but half conscious of what was going forward. At the last moment he had stepped forward, looked long into the dead face, framed in its plaits of gold hair, the hair that made three-cornered the round, wide forehead, looked again at the closed eyes, with their perplexing upward slant toward the temples, oriental, bizarre, at the lips with their Egyptian fullness, at the sweet, slender neck, the long, slim hands, then abruptly turned about. The last clods were filling the grave at a time when he was already far away, his horse's head turned toward the desert. For 2 years, no syllable was heard of him. It was believed that he had killed himself, but Vanity had no thought of that. For 2 years, he had wandered through Arizona, living in the desert, in the wilderness, a recluse, a nomad, an ascetic. But, doubtless, all his heart was in the little coffin in the mission garden. Once and so often he must come back thither. One day he was seen again in the San Joaquin. The priest, Father Soria, returning from a visit to the sick at Bonneville, met him on the upper road. 18 years had passed since Angela died, but the thread of Vanamie's life had been snapped. Nothing remained now but the tangled ends. He had never forgotten. The long, dull ache, the poignant grief, had now become a part of him. Presley knew this to be so. While Presley had been reflecting upon all this, Vanamie had continued to speak. Presley, however, had not been wholly inattentive. While his memory was busy reconstructing the details of the drama of the shepherd's life, another part of his brain had been swiftly registering picture after picture that Vanamie's monotonous flow of words struck off, as it were, upon a steadily moving scroll. The music of the unfamiliar names that occurred in his recital was a stimulant to the poet's imagination. Presley had the poet's passion for expressive, sonorous names. As these came and went in Vanamie's monotonous undertones, like little notes of harmony in a musical progression, he listened, delighted with their resonance. Navajo, Quijota, Unita, Sonora, Laredo, Ampagre. To him they were so many symbols. It was his West that passed, unrolling the air before the eye of his mind. The open, heat-scourged round of desert, the mesa, like a vast altar shimmering purple in the royal sunset, the still, gigantic mountains heaving into the sky from out the canyons, the strenuous, fierce life of isolated towns, lost and forgotten down there, far off, below the horizon. Abruptly, his great poem, his Song of the West, leaped up again in his imagination. For the moment he all but held it. It was there, close at hand. In another instant he would grasp it. Yes, yes, he exclaimed, I can see it all. The desert, the mountains, all wild, primordial, untamed. How I should have loved to have been with you. Then, perhaps, I should have got hold of my idea. Your idea? The great poem of the West. It's that which I want to write. Oh, to put it all into hexameters. Strike the great iron note. Sing the vast, terrible song, the song of the people, the forerunners of the empire. Vanamie understood him perfectly. He nodded gravely. Yes, it is there. It is life, the primitive, simple, direct life, passionate, tumultuous. Yes, there is an epic there. Presley caught at the word. It had never before occurred to him. Epic, yes, that's it. It is the epic I'm searching for. And how I search for it, you don't know. It is sometimes almost an agony. Often and often I can feel it right there at my fingertips. But I never quite catch it. It always eludes me. I was born too late. To get back to that first clear-eyed view of things. To see as Homer saw, as Beowulf saw, as the Nibelungen poet saw. The life is here, the same as then. The poem is here. My West is here. The primeval epic life is here. Here under our hands in the desert. In the mountain, on the ranch, all over here. From Winnipeg to Guadalupe. It is the man who is lacking, the poet. We have been educated away from it all. We are out of touch. We are out of tune. Vanamie heard him to the end, his grave, sad face thoughtful and attentive. Then he arose. I am going over to the mission, he said, to see Father Soria. I have not seen him yet. How about the sheep? The dogs will keep them in hand. And I shall not be gone long. Besides that, I have a boy here to help. He is over yonder on the other side of the herd. We can't see him from here. Presley wondered at the heedlessness of leaving the sheep so slightly guarded, but made no comment, and the two started off across the field in the direction of the mission church. Well, yes, it is there, your epic, observed Vanamie as they went along. But why write? Why not live in it, steep oneself in the heat of the desert, the glory of the sunset, the blue haze of the mesa and the canyon? As you have done, for instance? Anime nodded. No, I could not do that, declared Presley. I want to go back, but not so far as you. I feel that I must compromise. I must find expression. I could not lose myself like that in your desert. When its vastness overwhelmed me, or its beauty dazzled me, or its loneliness weighed down upon me, I should have to record my impressions. Otherwise, I should suffocate. Each to his own, observed Anime. The mission of San Juan, built of brown adobe blocks covered with yellow plaster that at many points had dropped away from the walls, stood on the crest of a low rise of ground facing to the south.